Hi, evening, and welcome to the Ask the Farmer. Evening, and welcome to the Ask the Farmer Q&A session for this week. My name is Brigid, and I coordinate the Farming for Nature initiative. And I'm joined tonight with my co-host Brendan Dunford, who is co-founder of the Farming for Nature initiative and volunteer with it, but also in his day job is managing the Burren programme in County Clare. So Farming for Nature was set up to inspire and encourage farmers that farm or wish to farm more with nature in mind. And one of the ways we do this is each year we find a group of exemplary farmers who become our Farming for Nature ambassadors. And this Q&A session is a great way of learning more from these ambassadors about their farming practices and what they do for nature on their farms and all the different land types and farming systems and what each of them are doing within that. So over the next hour, myself and Brendan will kickstart the session with asking our guest speakers some questions. And then we encourage any of you to write into the chat box any questions you have based on the guest speakers' farming practices for nature. And then we'll get around to answering, to facilitating asking as many of these as possible. So on to, if you have to leave at any stage or you know of anyone that would like to see this session, it should be up on YouTube, our YouTube channel, by tomorrow afternoon. So on to tonight's session. We are delighted to welcome Farming for Nature Ambassador from 2020, Stephen Morrison, to join us. And Stephen is running over about 300 acres in County Kildare. He has a suckler herd, and he's been doing that for about the last 23 years. He's not organic, but he is kind of transitioning towards a lot less inputs, and we'll learn more about that in due course. So Stephen's done a fair bit on his land to enhance biodiversity. And so Stephen, we're delighted to have you tonight. Thanks for joining us. Stephen, just before we get onto the farm, you might just tell us about your own journey into agriculture or to where you are today.
All right, yeah, thanks Brigid. Yeah, okay, so I'm a third generation beef farmer. And the farm is situated up in the northeast corner of County Kildare. So we wouldn't be too far from Naas, Bessington, and Newlands Cross is about 20 minutes away. So that's where the farm is situated. As I was saying, I'm a third generation beef farmer. My granddad was quite a well-known cattle dealer. So he used to buy cattle over in the west, Ennis and Athenry. He loved buying Herefords and Black Angus's. And in those days, they'd bring them back over on the train to Salins, and then they'd walk them over to the farm. So obviously cattle from the west, when they saw the good grass over here in the east with the limestone soils and all that, and our lovely weather, they used to put their heads down and just graze, and he'd fatten up the cattle. And then again, very sustainable, I suppose, in some ways, they used to walk them into Hanlon's Corner, which is up on the North Circular Road there in Dublin, to the marsh, and to be dealers there buying them for the UK market. And just one interesting thing, actually a Dublin person told me there, if you look at the road from Hanlon's Corner down to the Quays, I think it's called Manor Street, all the windows on the bottom floor, on the ground floor of those houses, they all have horizontal bars in them. And that was to stop the cattle when they're being brought from the marsh down to the ships, breaking the windows.
Wow.
So there's a bit of history still there.
Love that.
Oh yeah, so that was my granddad. He was quite a well-known cattle dealer in his time. So I came home, well actually I grew up in Dublin and I used to come down here at the weekends, and when I was a teenager I kind of developed a love for the farm, and I went to Gerteen in Tipperary there for a year to learn the trade, as it were. And then I went over to Scotland and did a HND in agriculture in Edinburgh. So then, yeah, one more year after that, I went off traveling around the world and managed to avoid a real job for another year. So I worked on a farm in France, Switzerland, Australia, and then up in New York State. So yeah, that was my route into farming. Came home here about 25 years ago and took over the farm. For the first few years, I ran it in a partnership with my mother. And then I went out on my own then after that. So that was the route into farming, yeah.
Fascinating. And I love the kind of little heritage involved in that as well. Tell me, Stephen, for just to give us an idea of your farming system and maybe your land type, what your farm looks like, how it's split up, so just kind of a visual I suppose.
Yeah, I'm really blessed. It's a beautiful farm, and it's all in one block, which makes it, so easy to farm compared to a lot of farms that are fragmented. So the farmyard is pretty much central in the farm. It's actually an old, it used to be an old barn yard. So there's a barn wall around it and a kind of fortified dwelling in the middle of it, which is about 600 years old. And there's a bit of history to that. When Oliver Cromwell was over doing his dirty deeds, he put the Duke of Ormond in it with a garrison of troops. And the legend goes that they chased the nuns up a hill just at the back of the farm, and the nuns hid in the firs, and his troops went in and they lit the firs to flush the nuns out. So it's been called the burnt firs ever since.
Wow.
So yeah, you have that bit of history on the farm, and then there's an old mill at another corner, and then in some of the fields you can see the lazy beds from when it was obviously in spuds. So that's the history in the farm. And then the farm itself, it's a limestone soil farm, so it's a bit like a saucer. The best land is on the outside. So if you drive around the road, you look in and you see all the good fields. And then in the center of the farm, it would be kind of a more peaty type of soil. It'd be a lot harder to farm, but that's really where nature is kicking off, is in the center of the farm. So that's yeah. I say there's fields on it now that there's a gravel and sand underneath them, and you could nearly graze them 12 months of the year. And then there's other parts of the farm where there's a heavier type of soil.
Okay, so what's your stocking rate, just so I understand, for the 300 acres? Or
yeah, well, I went. As I say, I joined a lot of discussion groups, and we were all getting encouraged to up the stocking rate. So at one stage, I got up to about 1.9, 1.8, 1.9. That's when I had all the sheep and the cattle. So, but in the last few years, I've started dropping back. The sheep have gone, and I'm back down to about 1.5, maybe, yeah, even 1.4 now. So as the inputs, so I'm spreading a lot less fertilizer than I used to be, grazing less livestock, and just not pushing the farm as hard as I used to be. So there's a lot of farmers out there who would say I'm going the wrong direction, but I don't know. At one stage we felt like we were on a merry-go-round. We were just putting more and more into the farm to try and produce more, and we were kind of just working ourselves night and day. And really, what were we doing it for, and what were we doing to the land as well, which was the really big question.
And I know this is a very kind of stereotypical thing to ask, but was there a light bulb moment? Was there something that you kind of because like you say, a lot of people are going down the same route. It's kind of hard to stop and turn around and head off down the side road as such. Do you know what I mean? It's it's a very brave thing to do as well. So was there anything that kind of got you thinking about it?
Yeah,
or
well, there was a couple of. I remember I was on a Board Bia trip to England with a bunch of us. Board Bia brought us over there because we do kind of field walks we used to do field walks for Board Bia when they had meat buyers into Ireland, and this was kind of our reward. So they brought us over to England, and I remember we were going around this beef farm in Herefordshire. It was a lovely farm in the middle of summer, and the farmer had all of us, there's about 20 of us there, up on the back of a trailer, and we were driving through the cattle, and I just remember thinking, there's something not right, something missing here. And then it kind of dawned on me. We've been traveling around for about half an hour, and I hadn't seen one bird. I hadn't even felt a blue bottle. There was zero insects, and the place was deathly silent. And I remember turning to the farmer beside me, saying to him, "Did you see a bird at all, or even a fly?" And he said, "No, you actually, come to think of it, you're right." So I presume that's probably due to the amount of spraying that was going on around there, or whatever. And think to myself, this is really not right. And then, so you'd even see yourself here, when you go out in the car on a summer's night, 20 years ago, the front of the bonnet would be, and the windscreen would be covered in dead insects. Now, you don't get that. And then I suppose on a more positive note, I joined Reps 4, and one of the things I had to do was fence off all the water courses on the farm. So there's a beautiful river goes through the center of the farm, and then at a right angle, there's a stream comes down from some springs. So I fenced them off, and I don't know, within about 4 or 5 years, alder started growing along the banks of the river, and they just took off. And it turned from being basically the banks where the cattle used to go in to drink and ripping the side out of the banks, to this most beautiful sort of, it's like a motorway for nature, just what these water courses were. And I kind of looked at them, I thought, my goodness, that's just beautiful. And the wildlife that came with that. So then we started getting otters, herons. I reckon there was more rainbow trout in the river because there was, you get the shade from the trees. And then, yeah, so those were some of the sort of moments that made me think, what are we doing here?
Yeah, and it's a nice simple measure, like you say, and it kind of rewards quite quickly. I love that, in your film, if people haven't seen it, there's a short film about Stephen's farm on our YouTube video. It's just 5 minutes long, but that you'd just seen a kingfisher that, just recently there, and you're like, that's something that's just come back as well to that area. Stephen, what else have you deliberately done on your farm for nature?
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, what we've done last year, I kind of went a bit crazy. So we planted 18 acres of native forestry. That was probably the biggest thing we did last year. So that would be trees like birch, hazel, holly, oak, what else? Cherry. So basically, if you were walking around Ireland, I don't know, 2,000 years ago, this would have been the forestry you would have been walking through. So we planted that. That was quite a big job because we had to put a deer fence up around the whole area. But we got it all in pretty good condition there this time last year. And unfortunately, the drought then that followed last spring was pretty severe. And we actually lost, I think, about 50% of the oak trees. So there's actually guys out at the farm today replanting all of them today. So that was the big thing there. And then, I'd say, next to the river that goes through the center of the farm, we have kind of like scrubby kind of banks and kind of like a hillside. And they were trying to take that piece of land off my single farm payment because obviously you couldn't graze it because the banks are growing kind of elder and ash and briars. So I basically had a choice, go in there with the JCB and rip all the vegetation off the banks and keep my single farm payment. And there's no way I was going to do that, or just leave them and lose the single farm payment. So I did that. And then I said, what the heck? Why don't we just take out that whole field? So there's about, I think it's about 3 acres in it, maybe 4. So I just closed that off to cattle. And Christmas of 2020, my nephew's getting married in America, so all the family were over there. We were the only ones here, so we felt a bit left behind. So we went off and bought a lot of trees, and we all went out on Christmas Eve and started planting trees. So basically what we tried to create there, we planted cherry, holly, and what else did I plant down there? Yeah, a bit of thorn. So, and a bit of rowan as well. So basically anything that produces berries for the birds is what, just trying to create a thicket. And the thorn hopefully will keep the deer back in the future, because I do have a problem with deer around here. And they really do like eating their own trees, unfortunately. So,
they get to the good stuff.
Yeah.
I remember when you and I were first speaking, and it might be the same field that you're talking about now, but I don't know if it is, how you had this fen and you were just saying, just one day I decided just to close it off to cattle and see what would turn up. And, you were saying how it was just so, I think it was 3 years beforehand or something. You were saying it was so alive
Yeah.
with insects and creatures. And in your video that also comes across that you decided that just to leave it, turned off. But then you mentioned in your film that you actually, you might look at grazing it just to maybe enhance the management of it. Have you kind of changed your, are you adapting the whole time of how you farm for nature?
Yeah, well, that fed is actually another part of the farm. And again, that would have been, well, we at one stage we thought about trying to plant trees on it, but it's way too alkaline, so you wouldn't get any trees to grow there. Then about 30 years ago, we put in ditches around it to try and drain it, which sounds terrible now. That didn't work. And then I realized this was always a piece of the farm that was the most difficult to even graze because it was too wet. And then I kind of realized, well, hold on a minute, this is spectacular. I had a neighbor came in, works in the Department of Botany in Trinity, and she came in with her partner and she just said, what you have here is fantastic. You really have to preserve this. So it kind of opened up my eyes to what we had there. So I closed it off to cattle. And what happened was, I remember now, 2018, I still had cattle grazing it, and that was the really dry summer. And they grazed it very, very tight because it was the only place left in the farm that had any grass. And then the following year, I actually closed it off to cattle, and I had a fantastic. There was flowers springing up all over it. It was absolutely beautiful. There's orchids, there's devil's bit scabious, there's so many different flowers growing in it. And so I said, this is fantastic. I'll just keep doing this, keep the cattle out. But the following year, which would be in 2020, just gone, it wasn't nearly as good. And what happened was the rushes were kind of taken over. And so I had a chat with my neighbor again, and she was saying, yeah, if you just kind of give it a light graze in the autumn, get the rushes under a bit of control so they're not completely dominating the area, get them out again and see what happens. So that's what I did there. I let cattle in there for about 4 weeks in November, and I've taken them back out again.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see this summer then.
Oh yeah, but you go up there in the summertime, and I have to go in there on a Sunday, and you'd be doing the herding, and then you go in there, and I lie down on my back, and there's dragonflies, there's butterflies, and just amazing. And what I've started doing now, because this is all a big learning curve for me, so I get out the phone and I try and take photographs of them, and then I come back to the house and get out the book and try and work out what I've been looking at. So yeah.
Every day is a school day. It's great.
Yeah, it is.
I also love the bit you were saying about the field names, like from 400 years ago, whatever. Like that's just amazing.
Yeah.
That kind of continuous like of the knowledge and the history and why things were cool, what they were. I suppose what a lot of conventional farmers might be asking, Stephen, if they're watching this, is so your stock's gone down, your inputs are going down. Dare I ask, and only cover whatever you want to ask, like what you want to this, but is your income going down?
Okay, well, when I let the sheep go, basically, sheep went and I put in the 18 acres of native forestry. So that is maybe not quite as lucrative as sheep, but there's no inputs. The grant, the forestation grant, covered the planting. Then we got another grant for the deer fence, because the planting came to about 42,000. The deer fence came to 15,000. All that was covered. And then my premium kicked in, and I'm on the top rate. I think it's about 660 euros a hectare. So, but that again, that's tax free, and the good thing about the forestry is you keep your single farm payment on that piece of land, so you're not losing that. And then there was one more bonus with the native forestry, which I wasn't really expecting, and that was I got Microsoft involved. So basically, there's a lot of companies out there that want to be connected to a good news story when it comes to the environment. And so Microsoft came on board with my piece of forestry. So they have the rights for the next 15 years to take photographs, to mention it in any kind of publications they have. but they don't have the right to claim the carbon. So if I ever get paid for the carbon sequestration, they don't get it. But when we were planting it this time last year, there was 2 days we had 70 employees from Microsoft came down on 2 different occasions. And so we all met at the house. We had tea and scones, and we had a few speakers. So we had a representative from the forestry company just telling the lads about the trees we were planting. And then there was another guy just talking generally about the environment and the benefits of planting trees. And then we all headed up to the farm. So 70 of us went up to the plantation, and we got the Microsoft guys planting trees for about 2 hours.
Brilliant. It's labor you couldn't find, really.
They probably were not the most efficient planters of trees, but it was brilliant. I mean, there was guys there that never planted a tree before in their lives. It was middle of December. I think the temperature was about 2 degrees, and there was basically horizontal rain. And I remember the fellas turned up in t-shirts and felt shoes, but they loved it. We probably should have had St. John of God's ambulance on standby or something, but we all survived, and it was great. Yeah,
that's brilliant. So if you were, where did you find your kind of advice and support? If people are looking for where they can go for advice, support, you've mentioned forestry quite a bit, actually. Is there did you get much advice and support around that? Or, where would you go when you're looking for information, I suppose?
Just generally to do with the environment and the farming?
Yeah, or just when you want to make changes and stuff like that. And
yeah, well, I suppose I find if you're making changes to a farm, well, first of all, a farm is a bit like an oil tanker. You can't change it, can't change course very quickly. It takes time. So for me, the first thing to do is start thinking about it in my own head. Then I start talking about it with family and other farmers, and then eventually pick up the phone and start doing something about it. So the ideas that I've got generally come from talking to other lads who've done it, or just reading publications. So I suppose what's driving me at the moment with what I'm doing on the farm is 2 main things. It's biodiversity loss, which is just massive, I think, and then climate change. And a couple of years ago, I will admit I was probably one of the lads there that was having pretty bad thoughts about Greta Thunberg and her gang and what she was going to do to the beef trade. And then I kind of stopped and said, right, well, maybe what she's saying is true. And it probably helped. My son has just done a degree in science, so he kind of put me right in a few things too. And I thought, yeah, well, this is really happening. So, what are we going to do? And I think when you own land, you have a bigger responsibility than most people to actually, and you can actually make changes quicker than most people can. So that's where I'm getting it from anyway.
Yeah, that's where the drive is. That's fair enough. Okay, before I hand you over to Brendan there, maybe you can just give me one top tip that you think any farmer in Ireland could possibly do or get involved in on their farm. What would it be?
I suppose most farmers now have electric fences, and I used to put the knapsack sprayer in my back and whack in a whole lot of Roundup and just walk around the farm and spray underneath the electric wire. I was never that comfortable doing it, but it was just easy and I did it. But what I noticed was, first of all, you'd have a horrible yellow stain down the side of your field, and it never lasted that long. And then when the nettles and the thistles, I don't want to call them weeds anymore, the nettles and thistles and docks, whatever, came back, they always seem to come back twice as strong as they did the first time, because you'd burnt all the grass off, so there was nothing competing with them. They just had a free run at it. So what I would say to farmers is, and this is what I do now, if you have a strimmer, just get the hedge cutting piece for the end of it, put that on your strimmer, and don't let the weeds get too strong, and just cut them with that. And it's much more pleasant for nature. So that's an easy tip. And I remember I was at the Ploughing Championships and I walked past this exhibition, and these guys had this thing that you could put on a front loader, and it basically all these spray nozzles, and you can just spray the side of your hedge or something. I just looked and I thought, that's a disaster, guys. What are we doing?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
that.
Yeah, no,
And also, like where these electric fences are, they're next to the hedge, which is, again, really, really sensitive area for biodiversity. So just don't spray anywhere near it.
yeah, fair enough. Good tip. Stephen, I'll hand you over to Brendan now. So for anyone in the audience and that's watching, if you want to write into the chat box some questions, we'll get onto them in a while. Thanks, Stephen. I'll be back to you in a while.
Thanks, Brigid. Yeah, Stephen, thanks so much. That was a really interesting 30 minutes just to get a kind of a flavour of the farm. So I'm fascinated on a number of levels. I think, as Brigid said, I think the combination of the natural and the cultural heritage on your farm is really strong, from the buildings to the old farming traditions and everything else that goes with it, and the field names, as well as the biodiversity. So it's really interesting like that. The first question I had was around your grazing regime. How do you manage? Do you do anything different? Has that changed over time now that you just suckler cattle? How do you manage them? Do you move them around in a mob grazing system, or do you just have sort of set stocking on fields?
I have a combination of both. So the spring calving cows, they would be in like a kind of a paddock system, but my paddocks are probably a little bit too big, so they stay in the paddocks for about 4 or 5 days. So I move them around to kind of a big area with like that. So that's kind of like a mob type of grazing in some ways. And then the other fields, it's all set stocking. But that's one thing I'm looking at, because my chogs advisor keeps telling me to put more paddocks into the farm. I mean, I kind of, in some ways, I do understand paddocks, and the kind of the mob idea is good because you can control the area, get the grass grazed off, and then come back to it, leave it, and then come back to it. And in some ways, it's quite efficient in doing that. And I think you could also, like, I want to try and cut out fertilizer as much as possible. So at the moment, I'm only spreading about 1.5 bags of 18-6-12 on the grazing area, and the silage area gets a bit more. So I understand that, but when you have a bit of inclement weather and cattle are stuck in paddocks with electric fences, they would normally kind of go to the nearest hedge for shelter, but they can't do that. And for me, I don't like that side of it. But again, I probably will put a few more paddocks in and see if I can almost get the fertilizer out of the system and just utilize the grass better that way. Yeah.
And Stephen, do you have housing for the winter, and what sort of supplementary feed do you use? Is it all grass based?
Yeah. So yeah, when I came home, there was very, very minimal sheds in the farmyard. There's just a few lean-tos, and it would have been kind of hay that was fed to the cattle. So yeah, I have invested a lot of money into slatted tanks and big straw bedded sheds and stuff, and silage pits. So the suckler cows, they would all have a straw lieback, and then they come out and eat on the slats. And actually, just last week, the autumn calved cows, I actually put rubber down on their slats, and I've locked them out on it now, so they don't get back into the straw area, just their calves do. So 2 benefits of that really is a big saving on straw, and the cows are very, very, very happy. They're lying down there all times during the day. They never once look to get back into the shed. It's a good sheltered site in the yard as well. So I suppose in the long run, I would love to get rubber down on all the slats, because that would be great, but it's quite an expensive job. So I'll just do a different pen each year. So yeah, so my philosophy is the last of the cattle would probably come in about mid-December, and I really don't like poaching on the land. So get the cattle off when it gets very wet, and I don't like heavy machinery on the land either. So I would keep that to a complete minimum during the winter time as well. So again, I wouldn't be that keen on having round feeders out in fields and cattle kind of up to their stomachs in muck. I'd prefer just get them in off the fields and then let them out again mid-March onwards.
And what do you supplement during winter under houses? Is it silage only, Stephen, that you use, or do you need to buy any additional feed stuff?
Well, because any of the calves that are born on this farm here, they stay here for their whole life. So I'd have a lot of different kind of age groups of cattle. What I'd find is with the silage, unless you're making a very high DMD silage, like maybe 72 plus, for weanlings anyway, I find you really do have to supplement them with about 1.5 kilos of meal, just to keep them growing, just to keep the protein into them. And I suppose my thinking behind that is, I want to try and send the cattle on their way when the heifers when they're about 18 to 20 months, and the bullocks when they're about 24 to 26 months, maybe 28. So really, they can't have a stage in their lives when they're slowing down too much, otherwise it affects the end date when they do get slaughtered. So yeah, that's what my philosophy is. And I kind of thinking maybe make better silage in the future too, just to try and cut back on the meal requirements. So yeah, so they get a little bit of meal during the winter, and then excuse me, cattle that are getting slaughtered, so about 6 weeks before they're slaughtered, they get meal again. And again, when they're out on grass, they're getting maybe about 3 or 4 kilos of meal, just to get the fat cover on them. Because when I slaughter the cattle, unless they have the proper fat cover and the right grade, you can lose a lot of money because they fall out of the quality assurance and I don't get the bonus. And at the end of the day, if I've gone to the bother of breeding these cattle, you want to get the most out of them.
And what breeds do you keep at the moment, Stephen?
Yeah, so most of the cows are either Simmental or a Limousin out of a British Frisian. And then the 2 bulls I have would be a Charolais and a Limousin. And the Charolais bull, he's what you call an easy calving Charolais. He has this calf called a curve bender. So when the cows calve, and it's just compared to some Charolais bulls, this guy he's a piece of cake. The calf wouldn't look great. When you see him lying there in the straw, you think, my goodness, you could do a little bit better than that, couldn't you? And then you come back in 4 weeks' time and the calf is just taken off. And I have all the stats. I mean, I'm killing bullocks at 26 months, 24 months, and they're coming into good weights, 420 kilos plus. So they grow. They take off.
And Stephen, what do you do? You sound like you're generating kind of finished animals over the course of a period of time, because you calve across the year. Do you just sell them directly to the factory, or do you have any additional routes to market? Yeah,
so all my heifers would go, well, any heifers that fall into the right weight range would go to a fellow called James Nolan in Kilcullen. So he's a very, very good butcher, and he actually got the award for the best butcher in the whole of Ireland and Britain there, I think it was last year. So he's very, very fussy about what he takes, but if you give him the right heifer, it's worth bringing it there. So I try and get my heifers into him, and then the bullocks, obviously, they go to a factory, so they go down to Waterford, where they go. Yeah.
Okay, and sort of rounding that, circling around then to the kind of economic piece and the sustainability piece. I suppose you're clearly farming in a way that, as you described with the river and the woodland, in a way that does support more nature than maybe the average farm. That's not reflected at all in the price that you're getting at the market, either from the butcher or from the factory, I assume, Stephen, is it?
No, it's not. And I actually did have a conversation with my butcher there in Kilcullen that I'm supplying. Would he be interested if I went down the organic route? Would he be interested in stocking organic beef? And yeah, he's open to the idea. All right, we haven't taken it any further, and I think I would probably find it difficult to get into the organic beef planet, or the organic movement, because they're not really looking for beef farmers at the moment. I think it's more dairy and tillage. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I've also thought about farming, or sort of selling meat straight to people's houses, and again, it's just the amount of time that would take up. And really, when you're killing cattle or any animal, you really need a market for everything. So it's easy to sell the good cuts of meat, but it's where you sell everything else that really makes the money for you. So I haven't gone down that route, but I might look at it again in the future. But no, just keep it simple.
And in terms of, I suppose, the policy side of things, obviously you mentioned reps in the past, and I assume you're still in GLAS, and I guess you're still benefiting from some single farm payment. Do you think that they're kind of supporting your way of farming now, or detracting from it, or are they pretty compatible? I suppose what I'm getting at is, do you feel that there's something more that policy could and should be doing to support your type of farming?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think yeah. Well, I mean, to go back to reps, I thought it was I thought the hedge planting in reps was really, really good, because that was a really solid, practical step you could take insofar as it benefited your farm, because you were putting in shelter for your livestock, and then you're obviously, benefiting biodiversity big time, putting in hedges, and it was going to be something that's going to be there for the future generations as well. So yeah, GLAS, the wild bird cover, that's pretty good. But I mean, I plant linseed and oats. Some years is better than other years. But again, I think in some ways, if the policy was there to let farmers just fence off corners of fields and kind of in some ways let nature do what nature wants to do, it's very hard to beat that, because I see the bits of the farm where I've let that happen. And it's just amazing what does happen if you give it a chance, and it's usually kind of better than a man-made type of manipulated system. And just to go back to the wild bird cover, I mean, I know it's probably a good idea, but like I have to go in there every spring and with machines try and plow it, harrow it, sow it. So like I'm kind of burning a lot of diesel to put in this wild bird cover each year. I don't want to be negative about it, because it's kind of got a good idea behind it, but in some ways, I think if we're all watching our carbon footprint, why are we really doing that? Maybe that 1 hectare should just be taken out of the farming system and given back to nature, and just pays for doing that. Might be a better way of doing it.
Or maybe not penalise you for doing it as per the eligibility rules at the moment.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
You said an interesting thing before, Stephen, about the farm being like a super tanker, and it's slow to turn it around. And I suppose when you expand it at a national level, then it's particularly hard to change a direction in farming. So clearly you're motivated. I guess you love nature, and that kind of drives you on to get a lot of satisfaction from it. But in terms of the crises, as you described, in climate and biodiversity, there's obviously need for big change, and big change very quickly, which is quite difficult to sort of to anticipate, given, I suppose, the policy constraints, like you said, about if you let parts of nature go wild, you're penalised under the single farm payment system for it. You're not rewarded by the market or by policy for your outputs. Where do you see change coming from? The kind of change you'd like to see in Irish agriculture, a move toward more sustainable environmental outcomes and social outcomes, and while not compromising the economic. Do you see that change coming, or do you think it's aspirational? And if you do see it coming, what do you think will drive it? What do you think will make the difference?
Yeah, I suppose from talking to some farmers there, I remember getting into a discussion with a fellow there about 3 years ago about climate change, and he was just sort of saying it's a load of nonsense, and I was kind of saying to him, well, it doesn't really matter what you think, because it's kind of coming as what everybody else thinks in some ways. So yeah, I think farmers definitely, they see it happening now, and I suppose in some ways the fastest way to a farmer's heart is through his pocket. So maybe if farmers were rewarded for what they were doing, it would really help. So I think maybe if we could start measuring each farm for what the amount of carbon they're sequestering out of the atmosphere, and then putting a price on that, and then giving that to the farmer, I think straight away that would have results. But it probably will be difficult to do, because there's different types of hedges. I mean, you got a young hedge, an old hedge, a hedge that's kind of grown into trees. What do they actually take out of the atmosphere? So it could be difficult. But I mean, I think we really do need to start measuring what our farms are, how they're benefiting the atmosphere, and basically the whole of society. So if we could do that, that would definitely help. And again, I mean, for me, I'm very passionate about trees. I mean, I was just reading the other day, fully grown lime tree. We have one out in the front of the house there, and I know myself from the summertime when it's in bloom, it is just, smell is beautiful, but the amount of bees on it is just fantastic. So a fully grown lime tree with a 360-degree crown has the equivalent capacity for bees as about a quarter of an acre of wildflower meadow. So, I mean, that's another thing we could start looking at planting. I've planted about 10 of them this year now, this winter, just standalone trees out in the field and let them become mature. And, you know, that's going to be fantastic for the environment as well. That's another area we could look at.
Yeah, and I think it's all about those co-benefits, isn't it, for carbon and for biodiversity and even for the quality of the water and the soil health as well. I think that's the holy grail, really, isn't it? Just last question, a couple of questions for me, and then we'll go to maybe the floor. Sort of, there's a lot of, I suppose, the perception that amongst many farmers that they're being sort of blamed a lot, and that they're being kind of blamed for climate change and for biodiversity loss, and there seems to be a kind of a gulf between the so-called farming and environmental lobby. Do you feel supported or undermined or threatened by those things, Stephen? First of all, and second of all, there's a lot of terms floating around now from, you know, the old terms like organic, but now we have regenerative farming and you have rewilding and different things like that. Do you feel those terms are relevant? Do you feel that that you're part of that, or do you feel that, you know, there's this increased polarization between environmental interests and farming interests?
Just maybe start with the first one about the different terms that are. I've actually just finished the book from set in Knepp Estate over in I think it's Sussex or Surrey, yes, in the south of England. It's a very good read. That
brilliant. Yeah.
Probably not mad about the term rewilding, because if we were to go back to the wild in Ireland, that would be kind of, you know, wolves and elk roaming around, and, you know, is that ever going to happen again? And I think as soon as you say the word wolf, you're going to get a lot of farmers' backs up. So I'd maybe drop the idea, the term rewilding, and go with something like just letting nature breathe. I think that's, for me, that's more apt, and go for benefits, just getting the bird life back, get cuckoos back, get the snipe back into the place, you know, do something that's tangible. Maybe, I don't know, perhaps beavers would be a good one to go for as well. Get the insects population back up where it should be. Even the hedgehogs, I haven't seen them for ages. So, you know, let's go with something that's actually doable. I think, as I say, the word wolf gets a lot of farmers' backs up straight away, and then they probably don't listen to the rest of the conversation. And also give you the benefits. Like, I mean, I have buzzards breeding on the farm for the last 2 years, and straight away I see the rabbit population on the farm is definitely a lot lower than it used to be. And then crows in the farmyard, like if you were here 5 or 6 years ago, as soon as I started feeding meal on the silage, there'd be 30 or 40 crows hounding me. Now, since the buzzards came, I literally have maybe 4 or 5 crows in the yard, and that's it. So I think that's straight away where you can see nature coming into a little bit more balance, and that's got a benefit for me, and also a huge benefit for nature. And then, what was the first question again there, Brendan?
Yeah, it was kind of along the lines of I suppose this gulf between the farming and environmental lobby. Do you think do you feel threatened by that, or do you feel there's anything that can be done about that, because it's quite unnatural?
Well, I think we need to come together, because we have to. And I think that's one of the great things about Farm for Nature, because for me, it's given farmers a voice. And I reckon maybe some of the farm organizations are just shying away from it completely. So, and even for the example of having Microsoft down here and getting all those guys, I mean, a lot of those fellas working at Microsoft would be that kind of generation where they'd be thinking about green ideas, but get them down onto the farm, get planting trees, let them see the cattle, walk the land, and even see it from a farmer's perspective that, you know, it's not easy doing what we do. So I think that's, and like at the end of the day, if you want to make a change in the environment, you got to get the farmers on the right side, because we're the ones that will make the change quickly. But we need to be rewarded, and we need to be respected. And I mean, I live a mile from Kill, which the M7 goes into Dublin. I can actually hear it from the farm. And back in the I don't want to say the word COVID days, but there was cars going in and out of that road from about 6 in the morning to like 10 o'clock at night. And, you know, there were just one person driving these big cars into Dublin and back out again, because it's obviously the commuter belt. And, you know, the toll that has on the environment. So, I mean, all these things need to be taken in balance and seen that way.
Super answer. Listen, I've eaten a lot of your time, so we go to chat. Sean O'Farrell, one of our wonderful ambassadors down Tipperary. Hi, Stephen. Impressive story. 2 questions. Are you noticing increased population of birds, dung beetles and frogs? And secondly, do you think you will get increased fulfillment into your future as you increase the nature value in your farm? I think it's yes to both questions, Stephen, but over to you.
Well, I was having a chat with Brendan and Brigid just before we went on air, and I was saying to them, it's actually quite addictive, this whole nature thing. I just, you know, I can't get enough of it now. All I've done this year is buy trees and buy nature books. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, is it because I'm looking out for them more? But I definitely feel there's a lot more nature on the farm. So, for example, this year, I saw jays, I've seen tree creepers, dipper, kingfisher. I've never seen a kingfisher before. I'd say the buzzards are breeding here. There's snipe. Now, I don't know if I don't think the snipe are breeding, but they're definitely here in the fen during the winter. So for me, I really feel like the place is coming alive. I mean, for the whole winter, I've had 2 collared doves in the yard. I mean, maybe they were there before and I just didn't notice them. But I feel invigorated from it as well. And that's another area that I really would love to stress to farmers, that the whole mental health issue is definitely something that we need to look at. And it's a big issue in farmers because a lot of the time we're on our own. When things go wrong in the yard, it usually has a domino effect and other things go wrong. And if you have a part of the farm that's just for nature, that you can just walk out of the farmyard for a few minutes, get your head out of the whole farming thing and just try and sort of rezone yourself, it's fantastic to have that. And yeah, so yeah, definitely it's here for good.
It's fantastic. Yeah, and a lot of the well-being studies would look at like the relationship you have, obviously, with yourself, with your family and community, but also with your local environment. And so I think the point you make speaks very well to that point. Dennis Leary, I think what Dennis is asking about 2 things. One, what kind of trout you have? He says it hopes it's brown trout you have and not rainbow trout. And secondly, if I assume what he's saying is if your land wasn't all top quality limestone ground, do you think you'd be as willing to return it to nature?
Yeah, that's a good. Okay, first of all, unfortunately, it is rainbow trout, and secondly, yeah, no, it's definitely going to be more difficult with the better fields, but I'm open to it. And the first thing I'm going to start doing now, I've done it for about half the farm, is I've stopped cutting the hedges, and next year that's it. Apart from the road hedges, maybe trimming some of the sides of the internal hedges. I mean, I'm just looking at the hedges actually today and thinking, why have I been paying a fella to come in here and spend a week cutting hedges? I mean, what was that all about? I mean, that was ridiculous. We were spending money, destroying a habitat just to look neat. It was nonsense. And that's the thing that I'm on a journey here and I'm trying to get my head around it. But I think for me, I've got to stop thinking of what are lads looking at my farm, what do they think about it? Is it neat? Is it tidy? Is it well farmed? And I've really got to start focusing on the next generation. What are we going to hand over to them? Because you know, it's one thing handing over a good herd of cattle and lots of good sheds and machinery, but if you don't have biodiversity, habitats, again, the climate change thing, if we're not giving them a world that's improving, at least improving, we've done them a disservice, and that's maybe it's my age, but that's the way I'm kind of looking at things now anyway.
Fantastic. I think you're definitely in the right direction anyway, as far as we're concerned. A couple of questions on dung beetles. Do you notice many, and have you noticed any increase? And Hugh Marcus, I think he's from up north, said he's been penalised in the past for allowing nature to take over some wet areas on the farm, even though he was in the countryside management agreement. And I think we mentioned that before, Hugh, the issue of land eligibility, and if you do surrender land to nature, that you really start threatening your single farm payments. But over to you, Stephen, on the dung beetles. Have you noticed anything?
Yeah, I've been looking for dung beetles, and I haven't seen that. What I have been doing though is when any trees fall, I used to be in there quick as I could with a chainsaw cutting them up, and I'm starting to let trees just rot. And what I'm seeing there with insect life is just fantastic. So that's one thing for me. Just leave branches, maybe just push them to the side of the field, and let the insects and the beetles take over there. Haven't seen dung beetles. And just to go back to that idea, the fen, I haven't lost a single farm payment on it, even though I've keeping the cattle out of it for nearly the whole year. There's a section there now, and it's only a new thing. That's because it's improving the water quality of my river, which feeds into the Liffey, which is a catchment for drinking water for Dublin. Because I'm improving the water quality, I keep my single farm payment on that. Although I have lost it on the 3 or 4 acres I've let kind of go rewild, but that's just the way it went there.
Right. A couple of comments from a few people, Sammy Leslie, on the rewilding, and a few good references there. And congratulating on the brilliant initiative with Microsoft. I think that's the Woodland Environment Scheme. So I think it's really interesting to see private sector funding coming into the payment for public goods like that. How did you connect with Microsoft? Phoebe Haddon wants to know.
The forestry company that I use is Greenbelt. I've used them in the past because I planted oak forestry there about 20 years ago. And just the boss rang me up and said, would you be interested in, he says he's got a list of companies the length of his arm. They all want to get involved. And he thought Microsoft would be a good fit just because we're not too far from them there in Dublin. I said, yeah, love to go for it. And
where did you source the trees from? Porrick wants to know.
They all came out of none so hardy forestries down in Shillelagh and Wicklow. So all the trees I bought privately for my own bit. For the birds down by the river, I did that from none so hardy, and then I've also planted a thing called a forest garden. That's a 1 acre paddock here beside the house. So that's basically again, that's a whole lot of different fruit trees and nut bearing trees, and I got all them from Future Forests there last winter. They make it far too easy to buy trees. You just go on their website and
that's a good reference.
And by the end of it, you've bought a heap of trees, but it's brilliant, and they deliver them in great condition. It's a little bit slower this year because of the way things are, but yeah, no, I'd recommend them as well. Yeah.
And you just call all your mates from Microsoft to come and plant them for you, isn't it? So last question before I go back to Brigid from Phoebe Haddon about hedgerows. Will you coppice lay hedges, or where will you put it, or will you put in new hedgerows? Any thoughts on that?
I have. 2 years ago, I put in a new hedge, brand new hedge, so double fence. This winter, just last week actually, I have another about 500 or 600 meters. And this hedge, like a lot of hedges you see around Ireland, it kind of got out of control. The thorn became bushes, which became little trees. The cattle have been all kind of walking in amongst them and a whole lot. So now what I've done is I put a double fence along that, and I went and I bought, I don't know, 300 or 400 thorn quips, and I've planted them in between the thorn bushes. I mean, those trees, they're really great for producing berries. If you see the redwings or whatever come down there during the winter, they just go from one tree to the next. So that's what I'm trying to do there. And a lot, that hedge is kind of got too big, so it would be too big to lay, that one. Yeah, so I'm just going to leave the thorn trees the way they are and plant in between them.
Okay.
Stephen, thanks a million. Do you know what? Of all the addictions to have, isn't nature? It's a pretty good one. I like it. It's good. Listen, there's a question here from Claire Lyons. What do you grow in the swards for the cattle to eat? Or I mean, do you have you added certain things to your swaths?
Yeah, well, over the years, I've done a thing called sharecropping. So basically, I had a local tillage farmer in. So we plough up a field, put 2 years of wheat, 2 years of barley, and then I put it back into grass. What I had been putting in was kind of your usual mix of ryegrasses, sort of perennial ryegrasses, and then I always put in some clover. So since I've kind of got more into the whole nature end of things, I haven't reseeded any fields. And again, I'd be a little bit slow about doing it because, you know, you're burning up a lot of diesel, you're releasing a lot of carbon as soon as you start plowing land. And you know, I do have a question on the silage fields. If you have a better kind of ryegrass in that field, you're going to produce a better silage with higher DMD, so you're going to be feeding less meal. So yeah, with the exception maybe of the silage fields, I won't be plowing up any more grassland anyway, that's for sure.
Fair enough. And Claire also asked, what nut trees did you plant?
I just went in there there was chestnuts and what else was I putting in there? I need to look at my list there. I tried to keep a track of what I was planting. I put so many in there, just the hazels, chestnuts, and then mostly it was just fruit was what went in. So like your apples, pears, plums, and then I gone back in this last winter. I put in blackberries, blackcurrants, gooseberries, because the whole idea of the forest garden is you have a whole lot of different layers of canopies, and so there, and then a whole lot of different types of obviously fruit trees, and then your pollinators, and then a few types of plants that will kind of legumes that'll get the nitrogen into the soil as well. So
brilliant, great diversity. Just a couple of questions from me, following up from you know, for the conventional farmer that's scared of losing his single farm payment based on, you know, you've mentioned it a few times, like your scrub took over an area and stuff. What do you say to that farmer? What do you think?
Yeah, and like I see it, I mean, I've had this discussion with the IFA and trying to highlight the whole thing with the scrub removal, because you see it when you're driving around the place and it's a disaster. So what I'd say to them is, really stand back. What are you going to benefit from it? Usually it's in the corner of a field that's probably hard to farm anyway. What are you going to lose if you just leave it there? And the benefits are massive. And my neighbor has actually done the very thing, and he's kind of altered the course of the river and a few things. It's horrible. I hate seeing it now. It's one of those things that the EU should be on top of much quicker than they have. It's just bureaucracy because they can't handle it.
There was someone said to me there recently, farming for nature is a lovely name, but actually you should call yourselves farming for life, because it's not just life below the ground and above the ground, but actually, you mentioned earlier, when you have life on the farm and that diversity, how it makes you feel as an individual when you're working by yourself as well. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of a very important aspect to the whole thing as well. And the other thing that we kind of didn't touch on, but you mentioned obviously you were under the grant scheme, or still are under the grant scheme for the agroforestry or the forestry planting. Are you doing that again? Have you had problems this year? I've heard there have been, certain problems with the forestry kind of planting.
Yeah, so I have another 8-acre field there that I decided to go for the native forestry with as well. So we put in our application there last May, and I thought, it'd be a pretty straightforward process. We'd be up and running for planting this winter, but it's completely changed. And my application basically got stuck on a desk with an archaeologist for 2 or 3 months, and then it got stuck with the Parks and Wildlife Service for another 2 or 3 months, and the latest thing now is stuck in the ecology section. And we were just emailing them there 2 weeks ago to see what the situation was, because we're running out of time for planting now, and their response was they'll probably look at it in 9 months' time. And if you want to speed it up, you got to do a thing called a nature impact study, an NIS. You have to pay for that out of your own pocket, which would probably be the best part, €2,000. And if I was to do that and present it to them, I would probably go up the list and they'd look at it within about 2 months. So I don't know.
And you didn't have those problems the last time?
No, last time was very, very straightforward, yeah.
Okay, so has the scheme changed, or?
Basically, what I've been told is anything to do with forestry, whether it's planting or felling or putting in roads, everything is just getting referred to this ecology section. And they only had 2 ecologists working there until a few months ago. So they now have 14 ecologists working there, but there's just a huge backlog. And I think the feeling there is that they're kind of given Quilcha, maybe, well, they're looking at Quilcha forestry before they're looking at the private forestry. So,
Okay.
I mean, I don't, maybe that's just a rumor, but that's what I've heard there.
Okay, interesting. Listen, Stephen, we've come to the end of our hour. Thank you so much. I know you've been on the spotlight a bit, and but you've done really well. It's been fascinating, and actually, there's some lovely comments have come in about how people have really enjoyed this talk, and they gained a lot from what you've kind of shared with them and stuff. So thanks a million for that. And like I say, it's a beautiful addiction to have, and I don't often use that word, sentence lightly. But listen, thank you for everything that you've achieved on your land and your generosity in sharing that knowledge. And it's great to have people like yourselves speaking for nature and so clearly and passionate about it. And hopefully the oil tanker that it is will change, and we'll help you push it around slowly. Yeah. So if anyone hasn't seen Stephen's film, like I said, there's a 5-minute film on our YouTube channel. Also, this recording will also be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So feel free to download it and listen to it at your leisure, or share it with anyone who wasn't able to make it tonight. They're kind of nice things to listen to, while you're driving a tractor or driving along or whatever. Then we also have an online forum. So if some of your questions weren't answered tonight, and feel free to pop up a question on our online forum, and farmers getting involved in that and answer that and stuff. So and it's obviously free and stuff. You just have to pop it up. Hopefully we'll be having a farm walk with Stephen during the summer, if restrictions allow us and stuff. Stephen and I have pinned down a date. I can't remember, you're in July, is it, or June or something?
Oh, 5th of June, yeah.
5th of June, okay. So these farm walks, we will be opening them up, but probably not until we know exactly where we are at a national level. So it's probably closer to late April, early May that we'll be opening them up for bookings, for obvious reasons. And then next week we have Thomas Fuhu, who is a tillage farmer down in County Cork. So do join us for that. Register under the normal place on our homepage on Farming for Nature. Meanwhile, thank you so much again, Stephen. Thanks for an amazing contribution tonight. And thanks to everyone for joining us, and Brendan, etc. So we'll see you all next week.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you.